In a cursed town where no one dares speak of the past, one final bell tolls for blood. The Final Bell, Part 1. A Town That Keeps Its Secrets. They say every small town has a secret. Some are harmless little things, old love affairs, buried debts, a touch of scandal whispered over backyard fences. But Grenton carried a secret with a heartbeat, one that pulsed beneath cobbled streets and behind church doors. And on one rain-slick, bitter-cold night, it finally surfaced. I remember the sky that evening. It hung low and heavy, thick with storm clouds that rolled in like a dark tide. Rain came down in fine, needling sheets, and the fog was so dense it seemed to swallow the town whole. The kind of night that made you feel like something was watching from every shadow. Detective Matthew Kane pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out of his car. The tires had barely crunched to a halt on the slick cobblestones outside St. Agnes Church before the call came through his radio. "Victims inside, sir. Locked room. Housekeeper found him." The old stone church loomed ahead, its bell tower a crooked finger pointing to the storm-churned heavens. St. Agnes had stood in Grenton for over 2 centuries. It had seen war, famine, plague, and things whispered of only in hushed voices after too much whiskey. Now it bore witness to murder. Inside, the church was cold and silent, save for the slow, mournful drip of rain through the cracked high windows. The scent of old wood, wax, and incense lingered like a ghost. A cluster of figures waited by the altar. The constable, the housekeeper, a young priest, and a broad-shouldered man Kane recognized as James Holloway, the bell ringer. The constable, a lanky, nervous fellow named Briggs, tipped his hat as Kane approached. "Upstairs, sir. The vestry office, locked from the inside." "Who found him?" Kane asked. Martha Whitlow, the housekeeper, stepped forward. She was a frail woman in her 60s, her face lined like crumpled parchment, hands trembling as she clutched a soaked handkerchief. I always bring Reverend Monroe his evening tea at 10:30. Always. But tonight." She broke off into a sob. Kane offered a brief nod and turned to the staircase. The vestry office was a cramped room at the end of a narrow corridor. A single high window let in the dim light of a flickering street lamp beyond the fog. The heavy oak door was still locked from within when Briggs produced the key. A room beyond was deathly still. Reverend Paul Monroe sat slumped over his desk, his face turned toward the wall, one hand resting beside a closed Bible. His throat had been cut, a wide, cruel gash that spoke of both strength and certainty. Blood had pooled across the floorboards and spattered the papers on his desk. But what seized Kane's attention wasn't just the brutality. It was the Joker card. A single playing card lay on the polished wood, its face-up image of a grinning jester smeared with a streak of blood. And beside it, a small brass bell, the kind used to summon attendants, sat ever so slightly out of place. A faint smudge of blood marked its rim. Kane's stomach tightened. "God help us," Briggs muttered, making the sign of the cross. Kane said nothing. His gaze lingered on the card. It wasn't the first time he'd seen one like it. 15 years ago, there had been another string of killings, victims found in their homes, throats cut, a Joker card left at each scene. They'd caught a vagrant for it, Elias Reed, a drifter with no family, no friends, hanged him, and the town slept easier. But now here it was again, and this time the dead man was a priest. Art 2. The Three Witnesses. A storm raged on outside, the wind moaning through the old stone like a restless spirit. The constables worked in grim silence, taping off the room and covering the reverend's body, while Kane moved to the church's main hall, where the remaining witnesses waited. 3 of them. 3 souls bound by the same night, the same secret, whether they knew it yet or not. He started with Martha Whitlow. The old housekeeper sat hunched on a pew near the altar, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles gleamed white. Her face was pale, hollowed by fear and age. She had been with St. Agnes for nearly 40 years, outlasting 3 priests and 2 fires. If the church had a heart, it might well have been hers. Martha, Kane said softly, kneeling beside her. You've always looked after Reverend Monroe, haven't you? She nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. He was a good man, God-fearing, kind to me when no one else was. I don't understand who could do this. You said you brought him tea every night. Did you notice anything strange this evening? Anyone lingering near the vestry? Any unfamiliar voices, odd sounds? Her brow furrowed as she searched her memory. I heard the bell. Detective. The one from his office. It rang around 10. I remember because I was folding the linens, but when I brought the tea, he didn't answer. She shuddered, and the door was locked. ... You sure it was his bell? I've heard it every night for years. Kane nodded, filed it away. The bell had rung. At 10, after the rain had stided. He moved next to James Holloway. The bell ringer was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with thick hands and the weathered skin of someone accustomed to hard labor. His gray eyes were steady but wary. He stood near the confessional, as if keeping his distance from the crime itself. Where were you tonight, James? Up in the tower, sir. Storm like this. I was checking the bell ropes. If they tangle in this weather, they'll snap clean through. And you didn't leave the tower? Not until Briggs came up and fetched me. Must have been near 11. Kane stared at him for a long moment. James Holloway was a fixture in Grenton, known for his quiet loyalty, but also for his temper when roused. The kind of man who believed in law and order so long as it didn't interfere with old traditions. Did you hear anything strange? A voice? Footsteps? The storm, sir, that's all. The wind made the tower groan like the devil himself. Kane left him with a nod. And then there was Father Vincent, a thin, nervous man barely in his 30s, with dark, deep-set eyes and a face pale as wax. His hands trembled as he clutched his rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. Kane knew little about him. Vincent had only come to St. Agnes a year prior, after the sudden passing of Father Callahan. Father Vincent. The young priest looked up sharply, blinking like a man pulled from a nightmare. Detective, this is unthinkable. Who would? That's what I'm here to find out. Where were you tonight, Father? In my quarters, reading. Did you see or hear anything unusual? He hesitated, and Kane's instincts flared. I heard the bell. Around 10. But I assumed Reverend Monroe wanted Martha. I didn't. I never imagined. And after that, Vincent swallowed hard. I stayed in my room. I was writing sermons, preparing for Sunday Mass. A thin, too perfect answer. No one writes sermons during a storm like this, on a night when the church groaned under the weight of the weather, and God himself seemed to hold his breath. Kane let the silence hang, watching the priest squirm. Then, without a word, he turned and made his way back to the vestry. Something gnawed at the edge of his mind, a detail out of place: the bell. Both Martha and Vincent claimed to have heard it at 10, yet James, high in the tower, hadn't heard a thing but the storm. And in a church like St. Agnes, the bell's chime carried. Either James was lying, or the bell had rung in a room already soaked in blood, and that meant the killer wanted it heard. A message, a warning, or a taunt. Kane stepped back into the vestry, closing the door behind him. The room still stank of blood and old wax. He moved to the desk, studying the scattered papers, the small brass bell, the blood-stained Joker card. And then something struck him. The card. Its edges were clean, perfect. No wear, no fray. But Kane remembered those old crime scene photos. He'd studied them during the old Joker murders, long after Elias Reed swung from a rope. In every photo, the Joker cards bore a tiny nick on the upper left corner. This one was flawless, his stomach twisted. Either someone wanted to resurrect an old ghost, or the wrong man had died all those years ago. Part 3. Ghosts of the Past. Detective Matthew Kane wasn't a man prone to superstition. He believed in evidence, in facts, in the blood and bone of a case. But as the storm clawed at the windows of St. Agnes and the scent of death clung to his clothes, he felt the cold fingers of the past brushing against him. He left the church, pulling his collar high against the rain, and made his way to the Grenton police station. The station was a squat brick building, its roof sagging under decades of storms. Inside, the walls were lined with dusty shelves of case files, most forgotten, some deliberately ignored. Kane moved to the records room, a place where secrets went to die, and lit a lamp. He knew exactly what he was looking for. The Joker files. 15 years ago, Grenton had been a different place. A string of brutal murders, 4 victims, each found in their homes, throats cut, a Joker card left on the scene. The town had been paralyzed with fear. And when Elias Reed, a vagrant with no family and a reputation for petty theft, had been found near the last victim's home, drunk and bloodstained, the townsfolk demanded justice. They got it. The trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was circumstantial, at best. A bloodied knife that might have been his, a witness who swore he saw Reed nearby, and the cards. Always the cards. Kane rifled through the yellowed papers, pulling the crime scene photos from their sleeves. One by one, he laid them out on the desk. Each victim, each throat slit in the same precise manner, each card marked with a nick on the upper left corner. He stared at them, at the grainy black and white images of death and cruelty. And something else surfaced, something he hadn't thought about in years. The last victim had been a man named Peter Hensley, a banker, unloved, unscrupulous. But there had been a note, Kane remembered, that went missing from the evidence file. He found the original report, buried beneath layers of paperwork. Victim was found with note in hand, blood-stained, message partially illegible. No copy of the message existed. That had always bothered Kane. Who loses a confession note in a case like this? And now, a priest dead in a locked room. Another Joker card. the bell ringing at 10. Coincidence or a careful resurrection? Kane leaned back, the storm's howl outside matching the one rising inside his head. There was one man still alive who might remember more. Arthur Becket, the coroner who'd signed off on the old cases. Becket had retired to a crumbling house on the edge of town, a recluse rumored to drink too much and talk to ghosts. But his memory had once been razor sharp, and Kane needed answers. Without waiting for the storm to ease, Kane grabbed his coat and left the station. The town was near deserted. Rainwater surged through the gutters, the cobblestones slick and shining under the flickering gas lamps. Every shadow felt alive, every alley a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He reached Beckett's house by midnight. It was a sagging two-story relic, its shutters banging in the wind. The windows glimmered faintly with lamplight. Kane rapped hard on the door. After a long, breathless moment, it opened a crack. Arthur Becket looked like death. His face was gaunt, skin stretched over bone, hair white and wild. But his eyes, those sharp black eyes, still held a glimmer of the old man Kane remembered. "Detective Kane," Becket rasped. "I thought you'd come sooner." "You, Mew?" Becket opened the door wider. "Get in, boy. There's things you need to hear before they find you too." Part 4. Confession by Candlelight. The inside of Arthur Becket's house smelled of dust, mildew, and something older, like long-forgotten books in a crypt. The windows were covered in heavy drapes, and the only light came from a single oil lamp sputtering on a cluttered table. Stacks of faded papers, medical texts, and empty liquor bottles littered every surface. Becket shuffled toward the hearth, where a small fire smoldered. He gestured for Kane to sit. "It's not safe out there tonight," the old man murmured. "Not with that thing loose again." Kane didn't bother asking what he meant. He already knew. "You worked the Joker case," Kane said, his voice low, steady. "You signed the autopsy reports. You saw the bodies." Becket sank into a battered armchair and poured himself a drink from a half-empty bottle. His hand trembled slightly as he raised the glass. "I saw them all right, every last one." The wind howled against the shutters, rattling them like bones in a box. "And you knew Elias Reed wasn't the killer, didn't you?" Becket didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, the flickering light carving hollows into his sunken face. He was a drunk, a thief, a fool, but he wasn't a murderer. Kane felt his gut tighten. "Then why didn't you speak up?" Becket gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Because Grenton needed a monster to hang." The town was scared, and there were men with power, who wanted it buried. They made sure it was Reed who swung, not someone else. Kane leaned forward. "Who?" Becket hesitated. His hand gripped the glass tighter. "It started with Peter Hensley," he said. "That banker wasn't just a crook. He was blackmailing half the town. He knew secrets about Monroe, about Callahan before him, about the mayor, the mill owner, the sheriff. He bled them for years." The storm outside seemed to hush for a moment, as if the very air were listening. "Monroe was desperate," Becket continued. "He went to Hensley one night, begged him to stop. Hensley laughed in his face. So Monroe slit his throat. Left the Joker card as a joke. But someone saw him." "Who?" Becket drained his drink. "The real killer, the one who took the card idea and made it his own. 3 more victims after Hensley, and every one of them had a hand in the cover-up. A trail of blood to protect the priest. Kane's blood ran cold. So Elias Reed was framed. And the others? One by one they fell. And every time, the town buried the truth a little deeper. The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. And now, it's come back. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of rain against the roof. Kane forced the question out. Who's left, Arthur? Beckett met his gaze, eyes glassy but sharp. Me, Holloway, and Monroe. Well, until tonight. Kane's thoughts reeled. James Holloway, the bell ringer. The one man in the church with the strength, the knowledge, and a reason to finish what started 15 years ago. Why now? Kane asked. Beckett gave a sad, crooked smile. Because some deaths don't stay buried, detective. And when the final bell rings, every secret gets told. A heavy knock at the door made them both jump. Kane reached for his sidearm. Expecting company? Beckett's face paled. I didn't tell anyone you were here. Another knock, louder this time. And then, the faintest sound of a small brass bell ringing, just outside the door. Art 5, The Last Witness. A knock came again, heavier, insistent, like a fist pounding against the veil of the storm, and beneath it, the unmistakable, chilling sound of a small bell. Once, twice. Kane leveled his weapon at the door. Arthur, get back. Beckett moved toward the hearth, his face drained of color. The door creaked open, and there stood James Holloway. Rain plastered his thick hair to his forehead, his coat dripping water onto the wooden floor. In his right hand, glinting in the lamplight, hung a small brass bell, identical to the one from Reverend Monroe's desk. But it wasn't the bell that caught Kane's eye. It was the blood, a fine spatter, dried in flecks along Holloway's collar and the side of his neck. Kane's voice was ice. Drop it, James. Holloway smiled. A thin, sad thing. I reckon you know now, don't you? Put it down. Slowly, Holloway set the bell on a nearby table. It landed with a dull clink, rolling once before settling. I warned him, Holloway murmured. Warned all of them, one by one. 15 years, I carried their sins. And what did they do? Pretended it never happened, like Peter Hensley's blood didn't soak into the church floor, like Monroe didn't slit a man's throat and beg us to cover it. Beckett spoke, his voice barely a breath. You killed the others. Holloway turned his gaze on him. 3 of them, eh? After Hensley. Each one as guilty as the last. Made it look like your madman Reed did it, so the town could sleep easy. His eyes glittered in the flickering light. And when Monroe kept on, kept his secrets, kept wearing that collar like it meant something, I waited. For the storm, for the night the bell would ring one last time. Kane took a step forward. And Martha, Father Vincent? Holloway's expression darkened. They don't know. Innocence, them too. But it's a rotten thing, detective. How rot spreads. I did what needed doing. Grenton's sins should be buried with its sinners. A tense silence thickened the room. Only the storm dared to speak. Then Holloway's hand moved, toward his coat, toward something unseen. Don't, Kane warned. But the old bell ringer's eyes were distant now, filled with ghosts and rain and church bells. I'll be seeing 'em soon, he murmured, the flash of a knife. Kane fired. The sound cracked through the room, through the storm, through every old lie that still clung to the walls of Grenton. Holloway staggered, the blade clattering to the floor, a thin line of blood tracing his lips. He smiled again, final bell, detective. And then he fell. Kane stood there, his pulse hammering, the acrid smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Beckett slumped into his chair, his face gray. "It's over," he whispered. Kane wasn't so sure. The storm outside began to ease, the wind dying into a soft, mournful sigh. But in the churchyard beyond, the bell tower stood dark and silent, its ropes frayed, its clapper still. Somewhere, deep within, Grenton's secrets had finally found their grave, and Detective Matthew Kane knew one thing: they would stay buried. For if you made it this far, you've already heard the bell. The town keeps its secrets, but we'll uncover them one story at a time. Subscribe before the next bell tolls.